Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshop, where we get together in the middle of the week to learn more about technology. Today, I'm excited to have back with us one of I call her an expert. She's been sharing her knowledge for many, many years, off and on all the years with genealogy. Sue Mueller is a retired educator like me, but also is an administrator. She's been seriously working on genealogy for more than 25 years and has used Family Tree Maker since 1996. And she was even a beta tester for them back in 2012. Don't know if she's still doing that or not. She has been teaching monthly genealogy classes for the Erie County Public Library. She is a leader of the Computer Users of Erie, the Genealogy Special Interest Group, whose purpose is to teach and assist members on the availability and use of computers and internet technology to begin, grow, and enhance their family history projects through webinars, libraries, demonstrations, personal recounts of successful research approaches, methods, and discussion, all of that. Today, she's going to do an interesting presentation dealing with your genealogy and how to enhance your genealogy story with social history. So, Sue, I'm going to turn things over to you and teach us a little bit about social history.
Okay. Let me make you smaller here. Okay, I do not mind being interrupted with questions, but I think Judy's just going to field them all for me. But if I say something that you have no idea what I'm talking about, maybe it's good to handle it then. So what is social history? It's beyond names and dates, which is pretty much where we all seem to start. But it's a study of ordinary people's lives. And what was life like at the time? What did they eat? What did they wear? Any of that kind of thing. It shows you that you're something part of something bigger, and you have a common story, and it gives you a new perspective and understanding of your ancestors' life. And sadly, most of us aren't recording these stories or writing them down, and they're going to die. So there's all kinds of things you can use for social history, and they don't necessarily have to be from your family. And I'll explain that as I move on. But you have photos, newspaper articles, you may have diaries, of a contemporary of your ancestor that tells a similar story to your ancestors. Books, history books, cookbooks can help, but the interviews also are very important. What was a typical day like? It may lead you to additional historical records. So you have customs, you have daily life, but all these things are shaped by historical events, which include epidemics, natural disasters, wars, military service, local historical events. And those events all would affect more than just your ancestors. So that's how you can find similar stories if you don't have your own ancestors' actual stories. Many of our customs are shaped by our cultural heritage, by our religious faith, by our friends, associates, and neighbors. And if you know their birth or marriage or death customs, that might indicate what faith they had and lead you to church records, because sometimes you're not sure even what faith they might be. What kind of occupation did your ancestor have? Where did he or she shop? Did they live in a rural or city setting? What language did they speak? What kind of social functions did they attend? All this impacts making more information available about your ancestor and his life. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my grandmother, and I have a true confession here. Grandma died in 1971, and I did not get these stories from her because I wasn't interested. Darn. She was born in 1884 and she was the sixth child of 11. And I'm lucky enough to have this picture of her when she was a little girl, and she's in the circle there. And then I'm lucky enough to have a wedding picture there. And I did find out my father was born in August of 1903, so you can do the math there. But I do have an assortment of pictures. And I have some stories I know and some I'm still trying to figure out because in her husband's brother or her brother-in-law's will, it says that any descendants of my great grandfather were not to get anything that he was an unmarried man, not to get anything of his. There's a story there, but I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to figure it out. But Grandma had a Victrola and she had canaries. And she taught those canaries to sing using the Victrola and sold them. And in 1932, she bought the lot for a present for my grandfather, the next door lot. And she lived in an area where the lots were like 40-foot wide. And still today, that's the only double lot on that long street. And by the way, the price of the lot was $38. So you can get information from the census to help you out, but that you have to always look at the original document. You can get some city directories are only going to have people who are working or the wife of a worker, somebody over 18. And because there's only in alphabetical order, you're not going to look at it and see a family unit easily because if Alice was married to Warren and they had a common last name, the only thing that's going to tie them together is going to be the house, and you might not look far enough down to see. Church records are going to be a gold mine. I will probably say this about 10 times in the course of this presentation. Always look at the original document. Check all headings because there's usually more information than has been indexed. And that may include the value of the property, whether someone owned or rent, and that may not be an indexed category. They ask about the number of weeks worked last year, if they had servants in the household, those kinds of things may not be indexed. So if you're depending on just the index, you are missing the boat. And the city directories, they have business advertisements in them too. So you can you can figure out what newspapers were published. That can be helpful, but you can figure out where you see where your ancestor worked, and you may get a sense of what the place was like through the advertisements. I wish I could tell you that every city directory was the same and that they all have an annual death index, and some of them even had a birth index. That's not the case. They don't. But they do have the home address, and they are usually in alphabetical order by the surname. And it includes the place of employment. They were designed to be thrown out at the end of the year. They were often done every other year. But luckily, some remain, and there's a lot of them that are online. And if you have access to MyHeritage, I love the way they display city directories because they'll hunt up your ancestor and try to group them all together in chronological order and in a nice display. The death certificate, on the death certificate is the name of the informant. If you don't look at that, if you don't look at the original document, you're not going to see who that was. You can judge whether the information, how likely it is to be accurate by who's giving the information. In fact, the census starting in 1890, they could get the information from a neighbor. And the only census that has who gave the information is the 1940 census. So you don't know how accurate even census information can be, because if the neighbor is giving the information about your family, he or she may not know it. Cause of death can be really important if you want to do a medical history for your family. Uh, and if someone died in an accident, there may be a newspaper art. There's more likely to be a newspaper article about it. So look at the whole death certificate. Look at the original document. Wills, probate, and estate records. If someone owned property, even if he, most likely a he, died without a will, there will be estate records. So don't give up if your ancestor died without a will. And now Family Search has started indexing complete documents using AI. And so they are indexing the people who are in the will, not just the person who wrote the will. And they're doing that with land records too. So all of the land records and the wills and probate and estate records may indicate family disagreements. My great grandfather, will says that to my son Erwin, by the way, who's my direct line, I leave nothing because I've already given him enough. Well, that gives you a clue of what's going on there. The religion may be indicated in a will, or one of the witnesses might be important. Find out who those people are, because that can broaden your research, give you some other avenues to pursue. I love orphan court or guardianship records. In some states, they're called orphan courts records, and some guardianships. And in Pennsylvania, they're called orphan court records. But because most of our country was using British common law, a woman didn't own the children, if you will. And if the husband died first, then a guardian was appointed to protect the child's interests. So those are very clear about who fathered whom in them, so they can be, and they're usually indexed. I'm not going to get into how there's an index book. I'm not going to get into the order because your head will be spinning. They're not strictly in alphabetical order. Let me just say that. Remember that if a child is left something in a will, the final estate settlement may not come until years later. So don't just stick to the year that you think someone died or that you know someone died. How am I going to figure out the church affiliation? Because on the marriage certificate, it just has the name of the person who performed the ceremony. Well, guess what? You can use that city directory to look up the person who's performed the ceremony, and that will usually tell you what church he worked at. Baptismal records, who are the witnesses? Always look at the original document if they're available. Baptismal records, marriage records. Remember, there's not just a marriage license or a marriage certificate. They had to publish a ban that the marriage was going to happen. And then who were those witnesses? Are they friends, relatives? Another avenue to pursue, perhaps. So all of these records that you're looking at are going to be a springboard to other collections. You'll find clues in family pictures, tax records, and that's another thing that Family Search is starting to use full text search in, which means that you are able to find other people other than the person who filed the original tax thing. Employment records. Some of these things that are online for your ancestors now, I don't think are going to be, when our progeny are going to be doing research 50 years down the road. I don't think these things are going to be available. You may be able to find like union newspapers or company newspapers, but you're not going to be able to find these things. And part of that is because of the old identity theft problem. So there are special collections of somebody's private papers or personal papers. It's usually someone of more importance maybe than my ancestors were, but or somebody who's donated to a cause. Their papers might be there. Um, they may be in historical society archives or university libraries. And they may not be available at all, but it's worth taking a look-see for. But you may find clues to business dealings and farm and business records. And even though your ancestor was a farmer, he may have had another business. So when you're looking at the say business schedules or that were available in the late 1800s, you may want to check because he may have had a tanning business, or he may have had a grist mill or something like that. If you're lucky enough to have family letters and diaries, I mean, have at it. Or if you can find somebody that has them, and I'm going to tell you a story of how I found some. This is just an example of an estate record. Um, and yeah, hard to read uh, for even those of us who can read cursive. Uh, I love newspapers. And more and more newspapers are coming online, and they're the ones that are out of copyright are primarily before, well, in 1929, but with permission, something could have been digitized more recently than that. So you can find more recent newspapers than that. Um, and when that was the only means of communication for people, they listed all kinds of things. Who went into the military, letters home from the military. You know, there was a time when they described the what the wedding gown looked like and who made it and all those details. So you want to read everything you can. And it might not be under a lovely headline that says weddings or deaths or whatever, a category. It might be in a little column that's musings for a certain area. So, and those old newspapers, they don't have a lot of pictures. It's not that I'm crazy about pictures, but pictures break up the page and it makes it a lot easier for me to read. And I will turn my monitor sideways so I can see a whole newspaper when I'm reading a lot of newspapers, so I can see the whole page. And I got that clue from a library I was at that had a lot of newspapers, and they had the monitors turned that way. I thought, oh, that's a great idea. Um, Academic journals and newspapers may be available. Diaries, journals, letters, those kinds of things. It may not be your ancestor, but it may be, say your ancestor was an Irish immigrant who came to be a servant in someone's home, but you find a diary about someone who came from Ireland and did the same thing. That will give you a sense of what it was like, even though it's not your ancestor who had the letter. So consider effects of illness or epidemics. Were family members lost? Just because somebody died at the time when the flu was rampant in 1918 doesn't mean that's what he or she died of. So you're going to need to look at the death certificate and see. But how did those epidemics affect your ancestors? Did the family move because of some disaster or disease, or for health benefits? Try, as they relocate, try to figure out the reason why. Was the family displaced by war? Were records destroyed by war? I'm amazed at how many European records survived, particularly in churches. Um, how did your ancestry's military life affect family members back home? There's a website that has newspaper articles on train wrecks, natural disasters, epidemics, and other events. May not be yours, but it gives you a sense of what it must have been like for your ancestor if he or she had something like that happen. When everything fit to print was in the newspaper, they listed the attendees for the funerals, they listed the pallbearers, There would be a thank you note afterwards where the family thanked people for rally round when dad died. And so don't use your cutoff as the date when you stop looking. And then there's another feature that old newspapers used to have, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and you might be lucky and they may have picked up an article about your family. So start your search with what you think is the right date, but then broaden it. And if your ancestor, let's say, was killed in a unique way, that may have hit newspapers beyond the scope of where that happened. I had two brothers that were hit by lightning, and the article I found, I don't even think it was in the same state. They were killed by lightning. I mentioned about the military letters home. There's stories, there's notices. That's why start just reading the newspaper. You might find some interesting things in those newspapers. And this is my friend's mother and father. He's a physician, she was a nurse, and that's her dog Ginger. And I was working on genealogy for her. So she had a lot of pictures. And guess what? I found a story. Dr. Ginner was he was ahead of his times in some ways, and he had a tower to get TV up the hill from his house, and he used Ginger by to go back and forth so he could contact his wife, uh, to, so she could tell him about how whether the transmission was good or not. And it was a nice article in the newspaper. Telling the whole story. Um, and they were printing everything that was interesting. So some places you might not think to look and might not be available, won't be available for tomorrow's researchers, I suspect, were merchant records, employment records, union records, if there's coroner records, and coroners generally are involved if there's an unattended death. It doesn't have to be, that there was a murder or anything like that. But so there may be records. And the only place that I know where they have those coroner records grouped together to search by state is a site called The Ancestor Hunt, which I have a link to on your handout. But the county and history biography books or give you some clues to things, but you can't use them for a source because they're not sourced. And even though I found them to be pretty accurate, what's in museums may give you a sense of historical or cultural histories. And some museums now are collecting oral histories or first person narratives. May not be your ancestor, but your ancestor may have gone through the same thing. And you might want to listen to those and see what you can find. Store owners kept records and ledgers for businesses, IOUs, accounts payable, those things. That's not happening today. Some of those records are online, and that will help you to just give a sense of what people were buying, how much things cost. It's hard for us to imagine that you could buy land for $20, but you need to look and see what the cost was for average land, and you can make a decision of whether that was your ancestor was well off or not so well off. Those things are in the state archives, or university might have a special collection. They might be in local museums. They may not be accessible to you, and they don't want to digitize some of those old records, sadly. But you can see who else was living in the community. I mentioned before what we call the fan club, which is friends, associates, and neighbors. You will find that they often moved with their friends, and particularly when it was an ethnic community, they were more comfortable with people who were like them, and in some cases spoke the same language. So as far as coroner records, this will give you a death record will give you a clue that such records may exist, and the newspaper articles, court records may, and they may not be online. You may have to go someplace else, and they may not be readily available either. But some of you might get lucky. Even if somebody only has a few records, it might be the one you're looking for. And when you get stuck, then you're knocking on as many doors as you can. So some companies have jobs descriptions on information online. They often had a regular newspaper, which may or may not be readily available to you. So just beyond where somebody worked will give you some where to look. The school records, you're not going to find those today. I mean, our progeny 50 years down the road aren't going to find them. But yearbooks, yes. Student newspapers sometimes. Annual reports, home records may or may not be available. And you need to ask Aunt Ethel if she's got something up in her attic that she has no interest in genealogy, but she's sitting on stuff that you want. So be sure to ask everybody that still has stuff in their attics about it. The school records are probably going to be at maybe a local or state genealogical society. Some of the large database companies may have some of them. You can restrict your search on most of those major sites to a certain kind of record. They may or may not be digitized, and somebody may not want you to go through that old box either. There were regional epidemics or things that disrupted a family beyond the 1918 1920 flu epidemic. Diphtheria, smallpox, scarlet fever, typhoid fever. When we didn't know how to make people better, the people died of these things. So if you see a number of deaths in the same cause in a single family, that might give you a clue that there was some kind of local epidemic. The history and biography and genealogy books may indicate that that there was something going on at a particular time. And I use the Armstrong County book, and they had the wrong disease, but they did have that there was a disease. It gave me a start. And I had a whole bunch of people who died about the same time before there were death certificates. So I had to do some hard work to figure out what the heck was going on. Accidents, there are websites that talk about the biggies, big kinds of accidents or big kinds of weather things. And that may give you just a clue. Even if it's not your place, your time, it'll give you an idea of what it was like to go through something like what your ancestors went through. I love these books. I've mentioned this before. They're usually at the county level. They may be multi-county, and they were popular in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. In some cases, they were vanity press. In other words, people paid to get their biographies in them, which means that it may have been more important families in the area than not. It just depends on the book itself. They also published centennial or sesquicentennial celebration publications. So look beyond that. You may be able to find some of them and get a sense of what life was like there. If you're into this and you haven't used archive.org, it's a great site. They even have a lending library where you can borrow a book digitally. So they do have some things that are actually in copyright. Most libraries have a subscription to Heritage Quest, and that's something that they have online rather than in site. So you would need a library card to access it. And it's you can find records there. Not as easy to search for a name as it is on some of the database websites, but you may be able to find records there that you couldn't find in other places. And then there's just all of these things are, don't try to write these down. All of these are on your handout. And the handout is hyperlinked, so you don't even want a printed copy. You want it a digital copy because it's got that stuff on it. Family Search does have a digital library where you can see some books, and some of them in copyright. And they also have quite an assortment of yearbooks on Family Search, and they're in the digital library. And this is just when I did a search for Bedford County. That's just some of the, and that was on archive.org. That was just some of the things that I found. I have to tell you this story about my granduncle, my great grandmother's brother. I never met him, but I was intrigued by him. And he generally went by the name Otis rather than George. And I was bound and determined I'm going to find out about him. And he died in Colorado. That much I knew for sure. But I had conflicting reports from other people's trees saying he died in 1930. I knew that was wrong because I had my great-grandmother's obituary in 1947, which I will show you in a minute. And you had to know that he was called Otis to be able to figure it out. But Colorado doesn't release their birth or death records for over 100 years. So I'm going to be long dead before George Otis Brady's death certificate is going to be available to me. So here's the see, it says Hodis Brady, but only because I knew it was Otis could I figure that out. So I'm figuring that was correct, so that the 1930 date was wrong, but I can't prove it. But he was an interesting character. He had 6 children. His wife died fairly young, leaving him with some children. And in the 1900 census, he was a salesman in a general store. And here he married again. I could find those records. And I found him in the 1910 census, so 10 years later, and that was listed as O'Brady. And he was a proprietor in a bicycle shop. And one of his sons was with him. And at that time, he was married. And I found him in the 1920 census. And he was married then. Brady was spelled wrong, but he owned the bicycle shop. And he had a wife. So I ultimately figured out that he was married several times. And I was in contact with a gentleman by the name of Doug Stuyvesant, who's a bicycle buff. And he was able to tell me stories about Uncle George and the bicycle business because he had an interest in bicycle information. So he told me some stories, and he remembered my name. And why is this important? Because he was out wandering, as we do, a cemetery, and he found George's tombstone, which has his death date on it. And he transferred it to me on Find a Grave. But he had remembered that he had been in contact with me and sent that to me. So now I was, I was able to find information about the death. But then in 2015, I was contacted by a DNA match. She had 4 people in her tree, and George was her grandfather. Well, I sent her off a note immediately telling her I'm, like the #1 source for information about old George because I've been after him for a long time. And I never heard a word. 4 years later, I was contacted by Francis's son. This woman, she's deceased now, but she was 94. I can't remember whether she was 94 in 2019 or 2015. But obviously she had done her DNA and, wasn't on the computer. And there, the contact came. Well, through the son, Bill, I was in contact with some other family members, and one sent me 2 pages of a handwritten document from old Uncle George. And I said, where are the rest of the pages? Can you get me those? And sure enough, she did. And she sent all 15 pages. And here in George's hand is story. And I'm not going to ask you to read it, but it had family history information in it in George's handwriting, which I shared with everybody who was, researching George. But look at what a gold mine. And then when he died, his son continued, not for a lot of pages, but continued to carry on a little bit of information. And when I read there that it said he was married 5 times, I thought, well, that's wrong. But I did find that that was correct. So the son wrote a little bit about his own life. What a gold mine that was. Handwritten. I just was so excited. So, as I said before, even people who have no interest in genealogy may have things that you want, family pictures or stories, or be able to help you identify pictures. So, in order for this to happen, you need to be willing to share what you have too. In other words, to have a friend, you need to be a friend. Um, so contact others and see, do you have anything? I will tell you about a story where I was working with a fellow in California with we had a common ancestor, and his ancestor had settled in Erie, Erie County, where I live. And we got stuck because somebody in the tree had worked on the Great Lakes, and so he missed a lot of censuses, and we couldn't get that information. And the name was Smith to make matters even worse. And he's complaining one time at a family group, and Aunt Ethel says, I have something rolled up in my attic. I don't even know what it is. Maybe you'd be interested in that. She goes upstairs and gets it. And it was so big that Jeff had to go to Kinko's to get it copied. And this is quite a while ago now. Um, and it was the Smiths, who married whom, where they lived, going back to the 1500s, that somebody had handwritten. None identified who had handwritten, but gave us a basis for a lot of research. So sometimes there are people sitting on things that you want that they don't even know they have, and they're not interested in genealogy at all. So knock on as many doors as you can, and if you try to contact somebody and it's kind of a leap of faith, you don't think they'll have anything, but you're going to give it a try, give it a whirl. You might knock on the right door. So where are these people hiding, or where can you find them? You might find them on DNA sites, and they might take them 4 years to get back to you. You might find them on Find a Grave. You might find them through obituaries and old newspapers, whatever. I've also searched for paired names where I have two people that married each other, and I've found wedding registries by having that paired names. It's amazing what you can find. Social media can be your friend, and you can also get people to look up, if you don't subscribe to something, to look something up for you on social media. But put it out there that you're looking for something. I wish these message boards were as popular as they were 20 years ago. They're not now, but message boards can be helpful. And even if it's an old message, you might get lucky and be able to contact that person. So finding people can help. 23andMe is back up and running, but I will tell you that most of the people that do 23andMe are interested in health information rather than genealogy. And 23andMe does not even have a way to attach a family tree. So Ancestry is the biggest, they have the biggest database. Family tree DNA is the only one that does Y and mitochondrial. And I wish everybody would just put all their results on GEDmatch, but they don't. But that anybody can put up their DNA on GEDmatch. Find a Grave has a decent message system if you can get somebody to get back to you. That's frustrating. But you may find people who have pictures there or live in the same family residence area and can suggest where you should go or what you should do. I mentioned before about siblings, other obituaries finding you more information, and that may include female relatives where you finally get their husband's name. So you're going to use obituaries to jump to something else. And I mentioned about the paired names. And if you think you've located a relative on Facebook, look through their friends to see if this might be the right person. Or just contact them and see if they get back to you. There is a message system on Facebook where you can contact somebody. And if you're going to go visit a site or if you're looking for where you can look for something, there are lots of groups related to where your ancestors lived or genealogy societies or historical societies, and ask questions. Where else should I look? Or can somebody help me out? But you have to be willing to share what you have. You can set up a private family group on social media and share pictures and stories, and that may get people who have no interest in genealogy to share what they have. So my word to you is don't be afraid to take a leap of faith, be tenacious, but don't give up because you're going to have to be patient, be willing to help others, and then you're going to have to be out there to get back things. And that's it. So let me stop sharing and
Overload. I'm every time you present, Sue, I'm amazed at the knowledge that you have on this topic, the time that you must spend.
oh, way too much. You know what I say? I'm going to use a few minutes to solve a puzzle, and at 9 o'clock at night, and the next thing I look up is 1 o'clock in the morning. So be prepared to. It's addictive.
Aren't you glad you're retired?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hey, John, I can't find myself.
I see
Do
you.
you? When you turned your camera off, you probably went to the end of
I'm always on my first screen.
yeah, but you turned your camera off, and sometimes that throws you away.
No, that's not. There I am. It's not fair. Hey, Sue, that
Yes.
was absolutely fantastic. You should see the notes I have taken here. And I even printed them to make sure that I could read them after the presentation.
In larger print.
I found one of the relatives. It was Fannie, Fannie. I thought my mother was always Fanny, and I've since found her middle name is Fannie. So that's the second time I've seen that. And that handwriting that went on and on and on and on. I'm sorry, that reminds me exactly of my daddy's handwriting, who was alive and well when that relative added all of that. So you never know what you are going to get out of one of your presentations. Absolutely fantastic. Anyway, that was so thorough. It was great. So many ideas. And at the end of Q&A, I'd like Bill to talk about his family group, and they get together and all that good kind of stuff. But does anybody have any questions for Sue? Diane, I knew you would. Good.
How did you know that?
Because you've asked questions during other genealogy presentations.
Well, I'm not really, I just recently got interested in genealogy. So, and I know very little about my father. And I was just wondering about war records. I have a father who was in the Navy on a ship, but that's it. Is there any way to find out more about that? This was World War II, and I have an uncle who's in Pearl Harbor, and I know nothing more. So I just was curious about war records.
Okay, but sadly, a lot of military records were destroyed in the 1973 fire in St.
Right.
Louis. Um, but for your direct line, you can apply to get what records there are. And Fold 3 has a lot of military records. That's a subscription site. It's also the top tier of Ancestry. If you have, I don't know what it's called, All Access, I think you have a subscription to newspapers.com as well as Fold 3. But some libraries have it. I know our library has Fold 3, and actually it's something we can access from home.
What are you saying? I can't tell what you're saying.
The word fold, like the folding a flag,
Oh,
number
okay.
3.
Okay.
.com. It's a subscription site, but you can do a search for, most places allow you to search for free. And if you see something that you think you'd like to look at, you can always see if you can find somebody who has a subscription and they'll, look for the document for you.
Right.
But there are a lot of military records that were destroyed, and they release 60. The law says that 62 years after someone has left the military, they can release those records. In actuality, they're make them public record. In actuality, and that would be like on the National Archives site. In actuality, they're only up to 1960. So those are, you could look on the National Archives for those, but with a caveat, and I can't remember off the top of my head, the records from the beginning of the alphabet, Army records, I'm not sure about Navy records, were destroyed up through the middle of the H's. I know that. So their priority obviously is veteran benefits. So for us who are interested in genealogy, we are a low priority. I've been waiting 2 years now for my uncle's records, and I don't think they exist. But we wanted to do a military stone for him, and we wanted to know what medals he had received before we did, the stuff.
Too cool. As you were saying that, I was thinking I'm the baby of the family by, up to 18 years from one of my brothers, and don't share with the baby. That's the past life, when daddy had black hair and now he's got
Right.
gray hair and white hair. And I thought his LAG tattoo on his left arm, Lawrence Alexander Griffin, was for, he worked at Standard Oil, Chevron in El Segundo. No, he was in the Merchant Marines, I just found out. So who knew? So that's, check that out. Because
Right.
both of my brothers, one was a Navy Seabee and the other one was just taking off for Japan on a ship when they dropped the bomb and turned him around and said, bye. But like I said, your presentations give me all kinds of ideas. So did you just say the military records, the national database was destroyed through H?
The Army for sure was till the middle of the H's, because my uncle's name is Hickoff, and I know that his records supposedly may exist. He was a prisoner of war, and he had one son from whom he was estranged, and then that son, had sons. So I'm working with the cousin to try and get those records.
Okay, well, we're G's, so that means all three of them.
What that was Army that I'm talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then maybe
Yeah.
the Navy's still good.
Right. I can, some of these things I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
So if you want to send me an email, I can send you my military handout and you can see what you can find. I know I have a list on there, what was destroyed. But if you had to try and get, if somebody was paid benefits, they tried to restore records. That's their top priority, obviously, is veterans benefits, not the genealogists.
Cool. Thank you. Bill James, tell us what you do with your family.
Oh, well, first I'm just going to address what Sue was talking about. There was a huge fire that destroyed a bunch of military records, and those were lost. I know, I'm not sure what the dates, but I can do some research to find out about that. But there was a fire at the record center that destroyed a lot of records, and they're trying to make some progress and trying to restore those. I don't know how they're going to do that, but that's been years. I mean, when that happened.
Right, it was 1973 in St. Louis.
Yes, that's correct.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, anyways, that's that. And I had a question, Sue, about that I said, well, because technology is changing so rapidly, what would be your advice for pictures and videos and other media that has been captured or stored on what might be, well, in some cases now is obsolete equipment? So how do we future-proof ourselves? It's like cassette tapes and some of the old uh, video things, or there's not equipment that you can play that anymore. And so a lot of that's been lost or will be lost unless you have go through a great expense of trying to get that restored. So what would be your advice about what we're doing now? Uh, it seems to me that the best possible way is just to write it on a piece of paper. But I'm open to your what
Yeah.
suggestions you
Well,
might have.
I also worry about my kids have no right now have no interest in genealogy. So they've even threatened to put my body over the house and just set fire to the whole thing. So I'm trying to digitize everything, figuring that they will save the digital rather than the papers I have. I did pull up this military record thing. There's some draft registration cards that were never microfilmed from World War II. And the 1890 veterans census, some were destroyed from Alabama to Kansas and half of Kentucky. There was an 1800 fire and Revolutionary War pensions were destroyed. And according to the fire in St. Louis, 80% of Army discharged between 1912 and 1960 with names on, and I misspoke, it's names after Hubbard, were destroyed. The Air Force discharged between 1947 and 64 was pretty much destroyed. It doesn't say anything about Navy on this list. I'd have to look that up. Yeah. I don't see anything here. This is just a sheet that I had done, so you'd have to investigate to
Yeah,
see.
I think so. I know some of my records were destroyed, and I was in the Jays, and I was discharged in 1970, and I think my records are gone as well. So
But if you want, do you get benefits?
I get retirement.
Okay,
I mean, I still get that.
yeah, they reconstituted enough to prove that you were in
Yeah, yeah.
right. And that's
And about the rest of Judy's question was, and I think you know this, Sue, is that my family is really involved in genealogy, at least from the standpoint of trying to record a lot of our family history. But like you, is that you'll find some family members that are totally involved in contributing, and you'll find others that are not. So it's kind of um, a toss up. And like you say, I don't think, once I'm gone, I don't think anybody, I have no heirs, so I don't think anybody's going to be really interested in trying to continue or even have any interest. So it's, but I still think it's a good thing to leave records because I know in some cases I've tried to look for information. My dad wasn't a person that shared a lot of information.
I think that's a product of the era. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's been really difficult of trying to find information on my dad's side of the family. And like Judy, is that my grandmother, my dad's mother, went by the name of Ida, and that's on her gravestone. But that was not her name. And I spent years trying to figure out who she really was. And I found out that her name was actually Alida, which, is a strange spelling and a strange name for most people. But she shortened it to Ida. And so, and then to make matters worse is that her headstone has her married name and not her maiden name. So it was very difficult, a lot of difficulty going back, trying to find information on her. And finally, one of my computer friends who was into genealogy um, broke through that and found out her actual name and her maiden name. And so that opened up a whole world of information.
Yep. I have one that's named Goldie. That's not her real name. And the only document that I can find it in, I can't read what the heck the name was. That is something else. And her death certificate and her tombstone all say Goldie on it.
But I would say that genealogy is really a fascinating hobby. If you get involved, I think you'll find it to be very rewarding. And just take the time to try and find out about your family history because it's really interesting. And don't be shy about the as Judy says the warts and whatever, because in my research of my genealogy, I found out that I had a relative that was an axe murderer. So, anyways, that's actually, and the other thing is that person is actually buried in Alcatraz, so no one claimed his body. So that was kind of an interesting historical fact for me.
That is warts and all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think, Sue, there is an organization in genealogy that is called the Black Sheep Society or whatever.
Black sheep. Yes. Mhm.
So I qualify for that moniker.
John Kraut, I love your background. It looks psychedelic to me. Are you going back to whenever psychedelic was in?
Okay, I got it unmuted. That actually is a photograph from our county fair. That was in one of the carnival refreshment stands. And I shot that picture because I so loved the colors of the various tall cups that they were selling. So that's where that came from. Uh, Given the discussion of the military records, I wanted to bring up a situation that I learned about from my late dad. He was a World War II vet, and he got involved early. This is something that a lot of us who were young or of draft age during the Vietnam War never experienced. In the 1930s, he typically got his news by watching the newsreels that were run in movie theaters when you went to see a movie.
Yep.
And they were uniformly just, how do I put it, depicting the war experience in Europe as an amazing adventure.
Mm-hmm.
My dad quit his job at a photo retailer in Richmond, Virginia, and get this, hitchhiked to Toronto, Canada, and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force as an air combat photographer. Now, the reason I bring this up is that we were discussing U.S. military records, but he actually served in the Canadian military for 3 years until September 1st, 1942. There were so many U.S. citizens in the Canadian forces and the British forces, there was a massive transfer through a mutual agreement of Britain, the United States, and Canada of those U.S. citizens to U.S. forces. So on that day, he became part of the U.S. Army Air Corps. But the real question I wanted to ask is, what's the situation with the Canadian military records? Are those under different legal constraints? And how can U.S. Citizens request information from that set of records?
I have not done anything with Canadian records, but I do have, I think it was World War I where they went to Canadian first. So I would think that you could probably find information on some of those online. So Canadian census records are available. So there's got to be a military, and they, it would depend on who can get the information. In some cases, at least in the United States, they restrict it to direct line.
Okay, thank you. I bring it up because that agreement in September of 1942 clearly implies that there were tens of thousands of U.S. citizens in those Canadian and British forces.
Mm-hmm.
And so it strikes me there must be a lot of records.
Cal, you seem to belong to several groups. Do you know anybody who is into genealogy in Canada? That's KAL.
Yes, no, I don't follow that many genealogy groups here.
Oh,
Sorry, I can't offer up any information.
okay. John Trout, I will send you a couple of email addresses of folks that are in the Canadian groups, and you can check and see what they know, if anything. I know Victoria has a huge genealogy group. Okay. Another note. Richard Bradford, you're on.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. I like using family search, but I've found you've got to be very careful and keep monitoring it, because people corrupt the records by merging people that shouldn't be merged.
Well, it's
So
one, yeah.
if you got things right, you got to keep an eye on it, because they might end up corrupted again.
Those are wiki trees that anybody can make a change.
But just a comment on Canadian records too that I've looked at. Some of the provinces have excellent records, birth, deaths, marriages, like I think British Columbia. Other provinces, the records are very poor.
I would start with the Family Search Wiki to see what they say is available, because they've really cleaned up those research wikis, and that's a great starting point.
In Canada, it seems to be if you're lucky, you've got them in a province with good records. If you're unlucky, some of the provinces don't have very good records.
Thank you. Of course, somebody from Australia would know about Canada. We're closer, but we don't.
I visited it. Very nice place to visit.
Liz, will you please unmute yourself? You did. Good job.
My question was, is there a good list of questions to ask, like grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, of family history questions or their life?
Yeah, there are lots of websites that have suggested places to ask questions. In fact, I think on my handout, let me review the handout before I talk off the top of my head. I think I have some links to those sites that
And the same with medical history too.
medical histories.
Whole
Yeah,
different-
we're going to probably strike out on that because some of them when you I've had some friends that have gotten some, and then others that have been turned away and said, you can't have that because their HIPAA prevents us from sharing those 300-year-old records practically.
I'm just thinking starting with immediate family and, some type of questionnaire there.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to be a grandmother for the first time finally. And my daughter wants to know things for her child. Because we have some people in the family, like my parents' generation, which my mom's 93, they deny anything's wrong. They're perfect. They're healthy.
Of course we are.
Yeah, but she has no allergies. Yet her nose runs all the time. All of our kids have allergies. So where'd it come from? I said, oh, daddy must have been the bad one.
That's interesting because I have no allergies, but my first daughter doesn't. Daughter number one, daughter number two, late in life, in her 40s, she developed an allergy to something. And so we don't know where that came from. So that does happen.
I mean, I think sometimes we were toughen up as kids because we were always outdoors and exposed to all the elements.
Yeah.
And now as adults, you kind of close yourself in the city. I moved in town, so I'm not exposed to those things. Or you keep the dust down and all the things that bother you.
Uh-huh. Or we're just so old we're immune to everything.
Yeah.
Liz, on the handout, I have a creating oral history.
Okay.
How to but it doesn't, and I know I've been on sites that have questions to ask, so I'll work up some and I'll send you because I have your email address.
Okay, thank you.
I was trying to check it too, but I thought, it's not going to work me looking at your handout. Karen, unmute, please.
Thank you, Judy. A quick question. You're mentioning the handout. How has that handout been distributed or hasn't it yet?
Been yet. Judy sends it afterwards, so that's why it's important to have your name match, not be Zoom user.
Okay, that's correct. My question, Judy, is that I'm interested in older records or any records from Norway. Both sets of my parents and their sets of parents are all Norwegian, all of them. At least I think. I don't know. But so I'm curious. I need to get records from Norway and I don't know where to begin. So, for example, I do know that my grandfather on my father's side got a girl pregnant before he came to the United States, and I would like to trace that gentleman because I know he exists. But I would also like to confirm a family tree that my father's sister made of my grandfather's side of the tree, that she paid someone in Norway about 50 years ago to track the family tree, and it goes back to 1106. Well, my instinct tells me that this can't be right because it's so far back, and unless it meant that this guy went to every village and looked at every Bible. And by the 11th century, Norway was Christian, so it's possible that's where he got it. But I'd like to verify some of this information because I have an enormous tree, and I don't know if any of it is true.
Sue, got an answer?
I would start by using a family search wiki on Norway.
I can do it by country?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You know I had occasion to call them recently to ask a question. Man, if you ever call them, they can answer your question, or they will find somebody that can answer your question and get back to you. And it was about military records. And she said, "Well, did you check the state?" And I'm thinking, why would I check the state for military records? And gosh, she was right. There were links to military records in the state that I hadn't gotten by using my traditional sources. So, yeah, those research wikis are, they've really cleaned those up. They're pretty darn good. And if they have something that they haven't verified on that, they do put, it needs to be verified. Some information, they'll include. Used to be that anybody could put whatever they wanted on those darn wikis, so whether they were true or not. And that's the problem with a wiki. And a wiki tree means that anybody can make changes in it. I don't know about you, but I can make my own mistakes without anybody's help. So, yeah, I want to be responsible for my mistakes.
Thank you.
Bob G., you're on.
One thing I wanted to point out is don't be afraid to use AI when you're stumped. You'd be amazed how much information is now available just by coming up with the right question to ask AI. It's a treasure trove that most people don't think about, but it has more information than many other things.
And that's why I like Perplexity, because it tells you where they got the information, because those chat boxes are programmed to please.
Any chat bot, you may finish your query by having them supply you with the references. Okay, so you're not just getting a made-up story. If you request references, then you can go back and you have another source to check.
And I use ChatGPT and Copilot. I'm a sissy. And those are the first ones that we started talking about. And they're just straightforward. Ask your question and put your descriptors in, press the enter key, and off you go. Michael, and then Joel, and then that Bob's answer, question, comment leads us right into our next presentation. Thank you for doing that. Michael, you're on. Unmute, please.
If you like Perplexity and you like AI chatbots, I'm going to suggest that you take a look at Perplexity's new browser called Comet. It is lightning fast. It's got an assistant, and it can perform agentic programs for you. I have been experimenting with it, and it is unbelievable. Again, that's Perplexity's search engine called Comet.
There's a one related to a chat box related to genealogy called Genealogy Eyes. Did I mention that?
No. Could you guys both put those in the chat for me, please? Either the name and the link, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm gonna get it. Yeah.
Joel, our last question or comment.
Okay, this is relevant to both the question about questions to get information about genealogy and also ChatGPT. I posted a link to you. I don't know whether you can distribute that more widely, but it's a website that has a list of 100 questions that you can ask it was actually intended to have ChatGPT generate from the answers a sort of biography of that individual. But you could probably take that and customize those questions for asking people in your ancestral chain that are still alive to supply information that might be of interest for genealogy purposes.
Thank you. And yes, I do have that. I'm looking at it as we speak. And hopefully I will be able to add Michael's and the other one, and we'll have 3 more sources. Hey, good Q&A, you guys. I learned a lot from the Q&A too. So, John, off to you.
I'd like to thank Sue again for all the times that she's shared with us. And I have a feeling that because of the whole aspect of genealogy, this will never end.